Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are completely dismantling a modern illusion that, let's be honest, almost all of us have fallen for at some point. We're talking about the success machine. If you've ever felt like your absolute entire self-worth is somehow inexplicably tied to your LinkedIn metrics, or if you've felt this deep, creeping exhaustion even when you're technically winning at life, well, this one is absolutely for you. We're going to dive into the philosophy of why we do this to ourselves, and more importantly, how we can actually escape it. Let's jump right into part one, the human doing. I want you to think about this for a second. If your job title just vanished tomorrow, who exactly would be left standing? It's a pretty devastating question, right? But it totally exposes the existential danger of tying our identity exclusively to a professional label. Seriously, when the promotions are gone, when the endless emails are stripped away, what actually remains of your core self? This right here gets to the absolute core of our conflict. On one side, you have the human being. This is defined by intrinsic dignity, unconditioned worth, just the simple, profound act of existing. But on the other side, we have the human doing. And this is an existence entirely driven by output, KPIs, and this relentless, exhausting need for optimization. The wild part is, society has somehow completely convinced us that we are supposed to be that second one. Which brings us to part two, the achievement society. So how exactly did modern society trick us into practically loving our own exploitation? The philosopher Byung-Chul Han maps this out perfectly across this timeline of societal control. Look, we've shifted away from the 19th century disciplinary society. That was all about strict rules, obedience, and the heavy burden of the word should. Then, we moved through the 20th century with the shiny illusion of limitless potential, the era of can. And that brings us right to today, the 21st century achievement society. We are now completely driven by toxic positivity and auto-exploitation. We've literally become entrepreneurs of ourselves. Han hits the nail on the head with this profound observation. He says, the achievement subject exploits itself until it burns out. Perpetrator and victim can no longer be distinguished. Think about that. The boss isn't standing over us with a whip anymore because we have internalized the boss. We are running this brutal rat race against ourselves until we hit a wall of clinical exhaustion. Moving on to part three, the incongruent self. What actually happens to our minds when we're reduced to nothing but a performance dashboard? Well, the psychologist Carl Rogers called this conditions of worth. This happens when we tie our identity entirely to external evaluations. If you only value yourself when you, say, close a massive deal or receive praise from a manager, you end up creating this incredibly fragile, conditional facade. And in the process, you totally lose touch with who you actually are. To put that into perspective, just think about how disproportionate this identity breakdown is for so many of us. For a typical modern professional, a massive 70% of their identity is often completely swallowed up by the need for external validation. Another 20% is dictated purely by playing a corporate role. And that leaves a dangerously small 10% for genuine, authentic, internal feeling. The real you is quite literally suffocating under all of that. Rogers describes this terribly painful, yet deeply liberating moment when a person finally wakes up to this reality. He notes that an individual learns how much of his behavior is a facade, a front, behind which he has been hiding. It's a completely jarring realization, right? Recognizing that your persona is essentially just a market-optimized mask, and your real self has become a total stranger hiding right behind it. All right, let's get into part four, dropping the facade. Now, dismantling this false front, it requires a pretty systematic approach. First off, you have to actively acknowledge the corporate mask you're wearing. Own it. Second, you must accept your completely unquantifiable worth. Actually, let's emphasize that. You are a living human, not a spreadsheet. Finally, and this is absolutely crucial, you have to shift to an internal locus of evaluation. You need to become the sole judge of what makes your life meaningful, entirely independent of the market's opinion. And finally, part five, reclaiming your authentic life. In his truly iconic book on becoming a person, Rogers lays out this deeply humanistic framework, and it serves as a beautiful reminder that true psychological relief, it doesn't come from optimizing yourself even further. It comes from finally embracing yourself as a complex, fluctuating, breathing entity. You don't need to be fixed, and you certainly don't need an endless series of productivity upgrades.
Which brings us to what is honestly probably Roger's most liberating thought. He says the individual seems to become more content to be a process rather than a product. Let that just sink in for a moment. The achievement society relentlessly demands that you be a finished, perfectly marketable product. But true authenticity, that means finding peace in being a fluid, ever-changing, beautifully imperfect process.
So, that leaves us with one final, rather uncompromising challenge for you today. Are you going to reclaim your right to an unquantifiable, unmarketable, and completely authentic life? Listen, you are not a machine built to optimize output. You are a human being. It's time to step out of the trap, drop that facade, and finally meet the incredible person standing right behind it. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.